So just looking at some of the chat questions. So what would your research have looked like without consumer engagement? I think that's a question you probably get a fair bit. So
yes and no. Like, as I said, like I thought, how do I measure this impact? Like, I had consumers involved, this happened, and as a consequence, this changed. I think all along I've been grounded in the confidence knowing that my research had meaning for people with spinal cord injury. And a couple of occasions, when people ask you, oh, so what's your PhD topic on? And I say, oh, media portrayal of spinal cord injury. And then they can see, well, I don't have a disability. I don't have a spinal cord injury myself. So they kind of see it as, oh, that's a bit of a random topic. Why are you doing that? And I go, well, it's because, and it's not only because I've worked with people with spinal cord injury and I recognise that it's a problem, but now I've had a team of people with spinal cord injury along the way. And at every step, I've been confident knowing that what I've done is going to have meaning. So what it would have been like if I didn't have them, I would have probably been questioning myself whether if what I'm doing is actually going to have any purpose or meaning. And that's not a very enjoyable way of doing your PhD, if you ask me.
it's almost a validation process, check and balance in many ways.
Yeah.
So it's probably difficult to imagine what the research may have looked similar, but it's that validation of what you're doing has meaning, I guess.
Yeah, and also, as I said before, like being able to take my clinician hat off and have those engaging conversations, that I wouldn't have had that. And so now I see lived experience differently, and that's been a real honour. And I would have gone into this with my clinician hat still on and been a bit too clinical. But who knows, it's not like I can do a little control group and figure it out.
So there's a couple of questions on, I guess, your experience as a clinician and also as a classifier. For those that don't know, you're I'll get this right, you're a paracycling and para winter sports classifier.
Correct.
Using my memory there. But I'll combine a couple of questions here just for the benefit of time. Is that so using your experience in those roles, did that, obviously you just touched on that, help inform starting the studies? So you might want to elaborate on that. But do you also think that more clinicians should become involved in research and do research degrees, whether a master's or PhD? And what do you think the barriers are for clinicians to taking that step to becoming researchers?
Yeah, I think the more stories you hear the better. For me, I've been a physio now for 27 years, maybe, so a long time. So I'm an older clinician, but an early career researcher, and that's a bit unusual. Like, I share an office with a lot of people that are much younger than me, and so I think there are barriers for people to enter research as an experienced clinician. But I feel privileged that I was in a position to be able to do it. I had a workplace that were very encouraging and supportive of me to do it, but I know that not all workplaces are. I think, financial barriers are an issue for people. I don't know how they can be addressed, but whether there's top-up scholarships that can help people, that would probably make a big difference. But I also think, the workplace, you can get easily bogged down in the clinical side of things, and it's really hard to find that space to think a little bit more broadly, because there are some fantastic ideas that float around in the clinical space. Like, I've had such wonderful conversations with colleagues and such great ideas. It's just finding that space to bring them to life. And I think that's more of a structural, systemic thing of looking at our workplaces and how we can foster that.
I know we could go on, you and I have spoke about this in detail, but one of the questions is about your research. I guess, this could be its own webinar on itself, is what was the biggest finding that surprised you?
For
In your
the media research or the consumer side of things?
Well, it's an open-ended question, so I guess we'll do it about your research. So.
Well, because I'm writing up my discussion at the moment, so I'm hoping to hand in my thesis the end of next month. So it's a fitting question because I probably should know the answer. Probably the biggest finding that has surprised me in terms of media portrayal of spinal cord injury is the role of sources. So they're the people that are providing information to journalists, and the role that the spinal cord injury community has in that. And I think as a community, we have the capacity to shift the narrative. And things, if you think in the disability space, there's a lot of work happening where I think, portrayals are improving. But yeah, as a spinal cord injury community, I think we can do a lot to make that change. And I think that's something I was not expecting at the beginning. I thought it was all media's fault. But in fact, we all have a part to play. So that's been the biggest finding for my research. Yeah.
And there's a question there that I may be able to answer, because I will disclose that I was a consumer in your work. So one of the questions here is, do you know what the engagement experience made to consumers' perception of research? And I think I'll be able to answer that as a consumer that was involved as part of your work outline, is that from my perspective as a consumer, is that it sort of gave me an insight of the different type of research, as well as the process and how detailed, even sometimes reading the study, you don't understand necessarily the workload that goes into it. So that's probably the biggest thing that changed my perception as a consumer in your work. So yeah.
That's a really great question. And sorry, yeah, that's a really great question. I didn't actually have that as my survey. I was more trying to figure out what their experience was, but or maybe I should have asked that question. Maybe I did, but yeah, it's nice to hear, Antonio.
Hindsight, as
hindsight, yes.
So thank you, Leanne. So we're going to share Leanne's contact details for anyone that wants to reach out, and so we'll share that in the chat there. So feel free to reach out if you do have a question for Leanne. That brings us to the end of the webinar. So thank you, Leanne, for participating. I would like to acknowledge our supporters. So the Consumer Engagement Program at the SRI is supported by the IOOF Foundation, and this series has been made possible through the support of Reid Charitable Trust and the Marian and Flack Trust as well. These webinars will be made available on the website above, so sri.org/webinars. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to contact me as well if you have any questions. So thank you very much.